So, what I'd like to talk about now is actually a Penny Arcade comic that I was reading about the other day. And so there was this Penny Arcade comic that made a joke about rape and offended a number of people. And the actual comic itself is about a World of Warcraft character who's freeing slaves from a dungeon, and he's already freed the 5 slaves he's required to, and a 6th slave comes up to him and says, please free me. Every morning we're woken by savage blows, and we're raped to sleep or something like that. And so, this irritated a number of people that I guess rape would be used in a kind of humorous tone. And so that's what I want to look at. And the reason I want to look at it, I realize this is somewhat of a departure from my previous topics, which are both novels, or series of novels, Anyway, gotta stay on topic. So I realize this is somewhat of a departure from that, but one, I don't care, and two, I think there's some continuity in the sense that this is an examination of a moral issue, which is something I care about. And I won't really give my opinion on, what I think the correct moral belief is regarding the Penny Arcade strip, but I do think it's interesting to think about and discuss, and so that's what I want to do. So on this topic, on my whiteboard, which I'm going to use to help me focus, the first thing I have to think about is the issue of feminism, and really what it means to be a feminist, because I feel like complaints against the rape joke in the Penny Arcade comic kind of stem from a feminist idea or ideal. So I think, first it's necessary to say that I believe all right-thinking human beings must consider themselves a feminist. And, if you don't, you should wear a sign so that a passerby might murder you to improve our society. I think it's a pretty important thing. But I think there are, different kinds of feminism, essentially. I think there's, a real feminism, which is the sense that men and women should be treated equally under the law and morally are of equivalent value. And this is the kind of feminism that I feel is required of any sane human being. If you think one gender is worse than the other, then that's a real significant problem. So efforts to enforce this or realize this are what I would consider feminism. And anytime you go on the internet and say, for example, read about feminists versus Penny Arcade, you're going to encounter people who will make a very banal complaint of the form, well, why do you call it feminism? That's, we're talking about advancing women or something, trivially stupid like that, which I feel like replying to, which is that, obviously the movement is termed feminism because it has its roots in a time in society when the advancement of women was what was required, when women weren't treated equally under the law and weren't treated morally. And so the term for advancing the gender that needed to be advanced bears the name of that gender, right? It's trivial. Feminism. But essentially, I think, we've made great strides towards the ideals of feminism. And I think in terms of law, we're pretty close to treating genders equally. Where we stray from that, I'd say, would be issues like the draft, for example, where men are drafted and women aren't. That seems problematic to me. But anyway, I'm getting far afield. I think there's another notion of feminism, though, that's more of a superficial, kind of societal level, like, you don't think, like if you find a thin woman on the cover of a magazine to be offensive or to be contrary to your ideal of feminism, then I think what you're getting into is more of a, on my whiteboard I've termed it, feminism de nom. Like you're claiming the name of feminism to make your complaints, but there's really not a feminist, there's really not a disparity in treatment based on gender that's inherent in featuring an attractive woman or a thin woman or whatever kind of woman, provocatively dressed woman on the cover of a magazine. To my mind, that's not an indication of oppression, it's an indication of market forces. And I'm more comfortable with that, in a moral and legal sense than I am with the first type of feminism I was talking about. And so while I think it's necessary to believe in that first type of feminism, which on my whiteboard I called de re, I think it's unnecessary to believe in the second, or rather, I think the jury is still out on that. It's definitely possible that, well, that is a topic for another day. Definitely worth thinking about, though. Anyway, so the foundation of my discussion of this Penny Arcade comic strip, I think, has been laid by my brief summary of how I feel about feminism. So, right, the comic itself, I think first I want to say I found pretty humorous when I first read it, because it is, I think, aptly characterizing the almost sociopathic nature that a character in any major MMO would have to have, right? Like, you're just going to free 5 slaves because your quest said free five slaves, and you didn't really care about all the horror that the slaves had to endure, right? I think that is a funny observation, and I think it's humorously written throughout. Like, we're woken by savage blows, raped to sleep. Pretty enjoyable strip. So when I first read about people complaining about it, my instinct is to think like, hurt feelings, get over it, etc. And yet, like a saying I like to think to myself in situations such as these is a saying that I first read on the Last Psychiatrist blog. I don't know if it originated there or if it originated somewhere else. But the saying is, you are being lied to by yourself. And I think it's interesting to keep that in mind whenever you approach a controversy. Because you have certain instincts, certain intuitions about ideas that are usually pretty useful and reliable. On your day-to-day experience, the thing you think is true is probably true about trivial things, right? Like, think there's not a car coming because you glanced over there and you didn't see a car coming, and there's not a car coming. That level of thing, your intuition is pretty reliable. But on complicated moral or philosophical issues, your intuition isn't really that much better than random chance, because your intuition isn't built to solve complicated moral or philosophical problems. And so what I like to think, you are being lied to by yourself, I like to think about that whenever I see a disagreement. Whenever reasonable people who seem intelligent, are disagreeing about something, at the philosophical, or are disagreeing about some complicated issue, then I think that's a good opportunity to say, to look at the issue and to get your intuition on it, and to say, you are being lied to by yourself. What am I thinking? What am I assuming is true that may not necessarily be so? Because while it's possible that my intuition is right on the subject, it's also possible that someone else's intuition is right on the subject. And until I understand why someone else thinks what they think, I can't be confident in what I think. So, that saying is meant to imbue your line of reasoning with a bit of hesitancy, a bit of doubt, to make sure that you can understand, that you can trust yourself, basically. Rather, you shouldn't trust yourself until you have good reason to, until you've examined your own beliefs and the reasons that take you to them. You shouldn't trust yourself because you can lie to yourself. Yeah, so back into context, what reason do I have to believe that the Penny Arcade strip really wasn't that bad, or wasn't, a moral issue? And I suppose, my intuition is molded by my experience in life. And in some sense, I could say I live with a lack of fear of being raped. That's not something that really concerns me. I go out walking late at night by myself, usually texting on my phone, and I don't know, it doesn't really bother me. I've never really been afraid of it. Those I'm about to get to, maybe I should change that actually. But I'll return to this point, So why do I believe that it's not really that offensive to say, some slave somewhere in some made-up MMO world is going to be raped to sleep? One reason might be I personally don't have the fear of being raped. Another reason, well, actually, I don't want to discuss reasons. For some reason, they aren't coming to me. So instead, I'll just move on to my next point, which is that I think immorality, if you're going to say something is immoral, you must show that it's harmful to someone. Basically, if morality means anything, it must mean that you're diminishing the well-being of conscious creatures. And that's an idea I took from Sam Harris in his book, The Moral Landscape. But it's one I really like, and I repeat it a lot. To me, that's what morality means, really, that you are making, a systematic effort to benefit people, and that there are reasons to think your actions will benefit conscious creatures. That's what it means to be moral. So if you're going to say something is immoral, which is to say that something is morally wrong, then you have to show that it in some way diminishes the well-being of conscious creatures. You have to show that there is harm for it to be immoral, in other words. And so I think there are probably three ways that that the rape joke in the Penny Arcade comic could cause harm. And the first is what I personally term, hurt feelings. Someone is offended. But I understand that this is probably too light a phrasing. And so on one of the blogs I was reading that was describing the various controversial complaints about this comic strip, they brought up what I think, and I apologize, but I've forgotten the name of the blog. I think like Shakefield or something. But they brought up, that saying like this is offensive, in a way fails to capture just how offensive it actually is. And the example they gave was, imagine someone who has recently been raped and having suffered and survived this traumatic experience. They visit their favorite webcomic, and they find that this horrible thing that they were just a victim of is now the subject of comedy. Like, imagine how that would make them feel. And so that's what we mean by being offended, or that's what we mean by hurt feelings. Really, for some people, it's a powerful emotion that's being played on for comedic effect. And so, I consider that. I think that's a pretty intelligent point, and one worth thinking about. And so, to examine it, is this captured? can't tell. I should think of a better way to do this. To examine it, I've just done some basic math. Maybe I'll read it aloud instead of... anyway, I've just done some basic math. So I looked up the statistics, the probability... I should say I looked up the statistics of the number of men who are raped every year and the number of women. And I found the numbers actually surprisingly close. 97 some thousand men per year and 140 some thousand women per year are raped in the United States. So I tried to calculate a percentage likelihood to be raped in a given month. And I did that by dividing it by the number of men and women in the United States to come up with a fraction that would represent the likelihood of being raped in a given month. So rather, I divided it first by, I divided number of men or women total who are raped in a given year by the population of the United States, and then divided that by 12 to come up with the probability for a month, which for men is, as I have it, point quadruple aught 5, and for women, point quadruple aught 7. And then I considered that the Penny Arcade readership largely skews male, and I couldn't find what I believe to be a reliable statistic on the imbalance between genders in the Penny Arcade readership. And I didn't really look that long because the numbers aren't really that important. But I just estimated it at 70% male, 30% female. And so then I weighted each of those two numbers, the point quadruple aught 5, multiplied that by 0.7, and added it to point quadruple aught 7 times 0.3 to get the balanced probability that a Penny Arcade reader would be raped in a given month. And the figure I came out with is, right, point quadruple aught 5.6, which is about what I expect. So then, for, I don't know why I said which is about what I expect. I had no expectations. That was weird. Anyway, Penny Arcade gets 200,000 views per day. So for a given comic, I really don't know how to translate daily views to views of a given comic. But we could imagine, you know, there are 1 million viewers of a single comic, especially a controversial one that probably gets shared a lot. Maybe 1 million's high, maybe it's low. Doesn't really matter. Again, the numbers are just kind of a tool to think about it. So when we multiply that, you know, point quadruple aught 5.6 figure that I talked about by the readership of the Penny Arcade comic, we can get the expected number of people who have been raped within the past month who read a Penny Arcade comic, and who in particular read the one, you know, about rape as a joke. And so that number, you know, with my somewhat made up numbers, is 56, which I think is surprisingly high. So yeah, so taking into account, you know, that this is offensive argument, to really understand what it means is you have to think, you know, one, that this is offensive to 56 people, more or less, on the level of, you know, you have recently been raped, you now read it as a joke. And you have to think about what that means. Yeah, and as I said, you know, I don't really want to offer judgment on what I think that means, but I think it's an important thing to note that out of all the like controversial kind of complaint drama kind of stuff I read on this Penny Arcade comic, I didn't read anyone really complaining about the first half of the comic, which I thought was strange. Because if you think, you know, this kind of hurt feelings argument, like the, you know, offended argument, if you think that's valid, then I think you have cause to complain about the first part of the comic. And by the first part, I'm attempting to refer to the phrase, you know, every morning we're roused awake by savage blows. like assault in the United States, and I also checked this, is about 10 times as prevalent as rape is. So what that means is if there are 56 people recently raped, there are 560 people who were recently assaulted, who were recently, I don't want to say savagely blown, because that seems somehow, is the word malapropism? That's not right. Anyway, that's aside. 560 people who were savagely beaten, or maybe not savagely. But there is some significant number of people who, in the month leading up to them reading this Penny Arcade strip, were beaten. And then they read the comic, and assault is woken by savage blows. That's funny. And so is that problematic for us? And why is